Good morning. Welcome to the James Bible study for May 17. This morning we're looking at James chapter 2, verses 1 through 13, favoritism prohibited, or favoritism forbidden, it actually says. Start at verse 1. My brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, must not show favoritism. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, "Hey, here's a good seat for you," but to the poor man, "You stand over there in the corner," or "Sit on the floor by my feet," have you not discriminated against yourselves among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Interesting, right here in verse 1, James talks about us as believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ. It's a unique emphasis, and it probably has to do with what he's going to say next about um, the impressive individual and the unimpressive individual. And I think what James is saying is that when you think about the glory of Christ in his ascension, in his power, in his majesty, then the distinctions that we make among ourselves about who's more important or who's more impressive just become very, very minimal. Um, for us as individuals worshiping the glorious Lord Jesus Christ, to be preoccupied with the minor differences between us as human individuals, would be like the people from Colo and Collins arguing about which city is larger and more impressive and more important. It may be a very interesting argument on the local level, but if you live in the capital city, or if you live in New York City, listening in on these two people from Colo and Collins arguing about who's more important would just seem really petty. And I think that's what James is after when he says, we are followers of our glorious Lord Jesus Christ. And the distance between all of us and him is so great that the distance between us as individuals should become very, very relevant, very, very irrelevant, actually. It's very small. So then he unpacks that. He has a man who comes into the meeting with a gold ring and fine clothes. Gold ring, of course, a symbol of wealth and prosperity in that day as in today. This individual probably was a landowner or a business owner, and so there's some historical reasons why they would greet this person well. And sometime we'll talk about more about the historical background of James, which kind of sheds some light on this. But this man is wearing a gold ring and he has fine clothes. Now, the fine clothes, of course, is the fact that he could afford the best linen, really nice clothing. But that's not the only reason his clothes are fine. They're fine because this man is not cleaning the stalls of his own barn, and he's not digging the irrigation ditches in his own fields. That's why his clothes are so nice and fine and clean. Um, we did the closet cleaning a week or two ago, and we were looking at my blue jeans and saying, "Oh my word, how are these so muddy?" Well, the answer is, we've been on the dirt digging up hostas and transplanting them, and when you do that, your clothes get dirty. This guy's clothes are fine because he had not been doing that. Guess who had been cleaning the stalls in his stables and digging the irrigation ditches in his fields? It's the poor guy who comes in next with filthy old clothes. They're filthy because he's been working on this other guy's farm or somebody else's farm, and so his clothes are kind of messy and kind of shabby and dilapidated. James says, if you say to the rich man, "Hey, up here on the seat of honor, on the seat of respect," and you oh, you go off, stand in the corner or down on the floor, by my feet. Extremely, um, extremely inappropriate. Extremely inappropriate. Then in verse 5, he goes off to a little excursus. Listen, my dear brothers and sisters, has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom he promised to those who love him? This, of course, is a reflection right back to the teaching of Jesus, Luke chapter 6, verse 20. Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's one of the many places where James reflects the teaching of Jesus, especially from the Sermon on the Mount. He talks a little bit about in verse 6 about the rich are exploiting them, these young Christ followers, these young Jewish Christ followers. Again, the historical background fits into that. Okay, let's drop down then a little bit to verse 10, where James talks about favoritism, showing this kind of favoritism, this kind of discrimination against the poor is actually a breaking of God's law. Verse 9, if you show favoritism, you sin. You are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. For whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it. He's talking here about the law is the unity. It works together. If I'm driving down the street, officer pulls me over and says, sir, you don't have a license plate on your vehicle. You need a license plate. I might say, well, hey, I was obeying the speed limit. My blinkers work, my headlights work. I'm wearing my seatbelt. I'm really doing pretty good here. And he'd say, no. The law includes having a license plate on your vehicle. If you don't have a license plate on your vehicle, you are a law breaker, no matter how many other laws you are keeping. And so James says to these young followers of Christ that the Lord who said, you shall not commit adultery, also said, you shall not murder. And the Lord expects his people to abide in all of his commandments. Now, why does he pick on murder? It's, of course, the sixth commandment, and adultery is the seventh commandment. So he says, James is saying, you're very proud of yourself for not breaking the seventh commandment, but you are breaking the sixth commandment. How? Well, James, it goes back to verse 6. They have been dishonoring the poor. This visitor, this guest who came in, dressed in shabbier clothes, working clothes, dirty clothes, this person has been dishonored, has been devalued, has been disgraced. And James says, when you do that, you are effectively breaking the sixth commandment. Interestingly, authors of the Heidelberg Catechism agree with James on this point. Lord's Day 40. What is God's will for you in the sixth commandment? I am not to belittle, insult, hate, bully, I added that one, or kill my neighbor, not by my thoughts, my words, my look or gesture, and certainly not by actual deeds. Interesting, the authors of the Catechism say that any belittling or dishonoring of a fellow human being made in the image of God is a violation of this commandment. And that's exactly what James says here. Now speak and act, James says, verse 12, as he draws it to conclusion. Speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom, because judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Now mercy triumphs over judgment. This little four-word phrase here, mercy triumphs over judgment, is kind of a four-word summary of a much longer parable of Jesus. It's Matthew chapter 18, the parable of the unforgiving servant. Parable teaching us that having received mercy from the Lord, it's incumbent upon us to pass along that mercy to others. So when James sums up all of his teaching here with this little 4-word pithy phrase, mercy triumphs over judgment, probably unpacks that in a couple different ways. One is that God's mercy triumphs over his right to judge us. And we're thankful for that. His mercy triumphs over his right to judge us. But then also, our mercy should triumph over what we think is our right to judge others. Mercy triumphs over judgment, and that solves the favoritism problem. So thank you for joining us, and next week Tyler will be leading us through the last half of James chapter 2.